Hello, everybody, and welcome back to Asheville Vedic Astrology's YouTube channel, youtube.com/Ryan's Vedic Astrology. I'm back again with Channing Ayers, and what we're going to be doing today is looking at another chart together. And again, these were charts that were submitted to us for review specifically for this YouTube channel. And we have about, we've done one already. We have this one and 3 more left. And there was such positive response to this that we will probably, hopefully, continue to do this. And I will continue going through all of those of you that submitted information to me first before we open it up again for other individuals to participate. And again, our goal is simply to look at a chart together to answer 2 questions that the client has posed. And in this case, we have a Virgo ascendant. I'll share the screen in a minute, but let me just pull up the questions. And this Virgo ascendant is asking, number 1, why do I struggle with romantic relationships so much? And number 2, which career should I pursue to have the most success in? So those are the questions we're going to be looking at. So first of all, Channing, thank you for being with us again today.
Hi, Ryan. Thank you.
Good to have you. Let me share the screen here. All right, chart 2. All right. And Channing, can you see the screen? Did it show up for you?
Yeah, there it is.
Okay, great. So again, what we have here is a Virgo ascendant with K2 on the ascendant, Saturn in the 5th house in Capricorn, Rahu, Mercury, Venus, and Sun in the 7th house in Pisces, Jupiter, Mars, and Moon in the 10th house in Virgo. And before we get into this, I do want to speak for a moment about a very important principle of astrology. And that is that we have to remember that each of these planets represents a particular agenda in our life. And that when an individual is confused about something, almost always it's going to be reflected in their birth chart, because their birth chart is simply a reflection of what their life is like. So when someone asks, why do I have difficulty in relationships? Well, you should expect to see some difficulty in the areas that deal with relationships. If someone is confused about their career or their direction in life, again, what you're going to find is there may be some negative correspondence towards the career. And in this chart, we've got Moon, Jupiter, and Mars in the 10th, which can be very helpful. But we do see that the 10th Lord goes into Pisces with Rahu, Venus, and Sun, which, as we'll discuss, creates a particular kind of Avashtan planetary state. And the problem with having more than, say, 2 planets in a sign at a time is that it creates too many agendas competing at a time. So this is like an individual who has all these ideas in their head about what to do, and they go one way, and it kind of works, but then these other agendas are kind of talking in the back of their mind saying, yes, but you should try this. So that's where the confusion comes from. The multiple agendas represented by the planets. And in the last video we did, it was on foreign travel. And I wasn't so sure that this person would be able to permanently move to a new location. And one of the consistent commenters said, you know, I've had a session with Ryan, and it was clear as day that I should move to another culture, be in another land. But they didn't even really ask me about that. They were already doing it. And that's because it was clear as day in their chart. So when we find something clear as day in a person's chart, 2 things. More than likely, they're either not going to ask you about it because it's something they already innately know, or if they're confused about it and it's clear as day, there might be a certain time period that's coming up where it's going to get activated, although that is rare. That is rare. So the reason I express this is because I want you to understand that when we're looking at a chart, as we'll get into it here with Channing, our goal really, when there is confusion, is to acknowledge that that is so, but also try our best to find those stronger indications so that person can really start to put their discipline, their energy, and their momentum behind it to achieve their goals despite all these competing agendas. So this is going to be true for relationships, and this is also going to be true for career for this person, which is why those were the 2 questions that she specifically asked about. I have everything else in the chart. Those are the two. And if you look here, where are all the planets falling? In the 7th house that deals with relationships, and in the 10th house dealing with career. And then we have Saturn, K2 in the 1st and in the 5th. So anyway, Channing, let's go ahead and dig into this. So we did take some time to contemplate these on our own, and I know you're pretty good at taking notes. So when you look at this chart, what are the first things that come to your mind? Number one, dealing with relationships. What are your thoughts on this person's relationship and why they have the difficulty that they do have?
Well, we can see that we have the Ascendant Lord. The Ascendant is here in Virgo, and we have K2 right on the Ascendant, and Rahu falls into the 7th house. So right there you have Rahu and K2 in the angles, which can definitely amplify and create some ups and downs in the realm of relationship. Mercury, the Ascendant Lord, is debilitated in the first half of Pisces. So there's an aspect to the Ascendant Lord going into the 7th house, the person getting into relationships, putting their energy too much into relationships. And then we also see an exalted Venus here, and we see the sun. So when we have gentle planets with a cruel planet and the north node of the moon, that creates a lajita, a shame devashta. So the person is experiencing something that they feel like should be different or should go differently. So we've got a couple different factors here. I also think that Rahu and the sun, even though they're kind of far apart, creates a lot of confusion in the person's life. They're really learning how to develop who they are. They don't understand exactly what to put their energy into or what their interest may be.
Mm-hmm. Right. And the point you made with Rahu and Sun being in the same house. Well, they are far apart, but we do have to remember that we've got the Pisces and Sagittarius as representing the second chakra. And so by having these two planets in the idea of the second chakra, it's going to show that the person does have difficulty, possibly in a healthy way, connecting with others from that second chakra level, which is the level of the sex chakra. And then the Lajita Vashta you mentioned perfectly. And with that Rahu, the fact that Rahu and Venus is involved, that Venus is going to do well because it's exalted, certainly. But anytime we get Rahu and Venus together, that's going to bring confusion around the person's ability to kind of get beyond the fantasy of relationships. I always call it the fairy tale or the soulmate syndrome, where there's an idea that there is the perfect one out there. And then with Mercury and the Sun, without Avashta, that oftentimes gives difficulties with boundaries in relationships, difficulty setting boundaries. So my thought would be, does this person have difficulty having good boundaries in relationships? Do they know? Have they had good role models in regards to having a healthy relationship? And in that situation, I think it's probably a good idea for them to get some counseling or to read some books on what it means to have a healthy relationship. Because when I see this, oftentimes this tells me a person might be more prone to having like a codependent relationship. Yeah, go ahead.
Oh, I was just going to say, yeah, there's a tendency maybe even to collapse themselves into a relationship, or believing that the relationship itself is going to create structure for their identity, because this Rahu here is a development in the 7th house.
Right.
Pulling them towards that.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm. And that Rahu, I've said it many times, that's like where a person's drunk on their karma. And in the same way that, when someone's drunk and they want to drive, well, they're not making a good decision there. So they need a friend to say, hey, should I drive or not? So one of the things I recommend when we've got Rahu, especially with Venus and Mercury, which is also a very a relationship-centered planet, is that they really need to talk to someone who does have successful relationships and model their ideas around relationships after what that person says. So this person does have potential for relationships because they've got a lot of development there. They've got the 7th Lord in the 10th house. which also makes me think that this person might be in a relationship with someone in a similar career as them, or on a similar work-related path with them. One of the difficulties that might be there with that sun being the seventh is I'd be curious to see if they have a potential, I don't know, they've only asked me 2 questions with no background information, if they have a potential to sort of subjugate themselves to authority figures, in work situations, in inappropriate relationship ways. And that would be one thing to avoid. Mm-hmm. But what I think, and what we could really do is strengthen this Mercury, first and foremost, because by doing that, that's going to strengthen the ascendant Lord, the sense of self. That's going to strengthen their capacity to manage relationships, have better boundaries. It would better improve the confusion of Rahu. And how do we do that? Well, number one, a wonderful gemstone for Mercury, and please correct me if I'm wrong here. Is it zircon, Channing?
Zircon, yeah. I believe zircon's the one that's connected with Mercury. And I guess in Pisces, you would be looking for a clear zircon.
Right. Okay. And you are the gemstone specialist, since you are also the jewelry maker. What size stone would you recommend for a zircon for this individual? Are these able to be smaller stones, or do they need to be bigger stones carat wise?
I would think that zircon is pretty hard. So the harder the stone, the less size you need. I think there's a chart with the hardness scale. So you look at the hardness scale and then you kind of try to match it with carats.
Okay. Yeah, I do know zircon's pretty dense. I think I have a zircon that I got from my Mercury, and it seemed to be a high carat weight, but it was also smaller than I would expect. So clear zircon, is that right?
Yeah, clear's a good color for Pisces, yeah.
Yeah, so a clear zircon set to touch the skin. Mantras for Mercury, I believe also mantras for Vishnu as well, can help to develop this Mercury. And that's the esoteric idea behind it. But the thing with Mercury is that we always really need to try to be, where's your Mercury? Wait, never mind. So when we're thinking about Mercury in Pisces, Mercury in Pisces has difficulty because it's too scattered, right? Mm-hmm. So from your perspective, when you've worked with people with this kind of position, how do you counsel them to help improve that Mercury on a more practical level?
Yeah, well, besides the mantras, which are wonderful, and gemstones, which can help, but I would use those as a last resort, honestly, because they're going to help us on some level, which is awesome, but they're not going to take care of all of our problems.
Right.
I would say practical application, possibly relationship classes. Mm-hmm. There's some really awesome types of resources out there, compassionate communication classes. Mm-hmm. There's so many wonderful books going on out there, and really getting into a frame of mind of understanding what it means to develop this planet. So learning as much as possible about the planet Mercury, education about what Mercury is when it's strong and what Mercury isn't when it's strong. So it has a lot to do with that ability to think and cognize and organize and manage things. So there's definitely always going to be room for improvement on the management level of things. So that could include any sort of education. And it may take a little effort. It may take a little more effort for this person because
Well, that Rahu is going to do it. I mean, that's going to create a lot of confusion around how to achieve it and how to get started, right? That's the big issue.
Yeah, exactly. It's not going to naturally come to them. They're really going to have to put some effort in to develop this, which is what we see when we see a planet that's in difficult dignity, is that these skills aren't going to naturally be there, that they need to be developed. They need to be consciously focused on.
So then probably ideally what we should recommend is this person do some more research on the positive aspects of Mercury and do their best to try to embody and make those things natural for themselves. That will help to improve their path in life and their relationships and so on, correct?
Right. Yeah.
Okay, good. And one final thing on the relationship, and then we'll move on to the career, because that was the second question, is, for the person whose chart this is, remember, when you've got Rahu in the 7th house, that shows you're not going to innately understand what to do. And so you have to you have to try, you have to experiment, you have to do what Channing said, take classes, and it'll be very uncomfortable for a while because it'll seem like you want it to be easier than it is. But in time, you learn to develop that Mercury, which in turn develops the Rahu, which allows you to tap into that positive Venus, which can also allow you to help that Sun function in a more efficient fashion, more effective fashion. So it can be done. You know, use the mantras, use the gemstones to help empower it, but do the practical work. That's the main thing.
And I do think that it's going to get a little easier for this person as Saturn moves out of Sagittarius. I think that Saturn being in Sagittarius has probably really triggered a lot of these placements in the dual signs, in Pisces and in Gemini. So this person's sort of been getting a big dose of that Saturn reality check for a
Right.
And so,
yeah, and just to be clear, we're talking about Saturn in tropical Pisces moving into tropical Capricorn, which will happen in January of 2018, correct?
tropical Sagittarius.
Excuse me, pardon me, tropical Sagittarius moving into tropical Capricorn.
Yeah, exactly. So when that's they're about, getting ready for their Saturn return.
Mm-hmm.
So there's a lot of potential as Saturn goes into their 5th house, especially with things like mantras and being able to put some energy into directing their life in the direction they would like it to go into, more
Right.
so with the Saturn return, and lightening up with Saturn moving out of that angle,
Mm-hmm.
aspecting everything.
And when Saturn goes into Capricorn, it's going to be aspecting that Rahu, Mercury, Venus, and Sun, but that Saturn's going to be in good dignity as well. So yeah. Always remember, when you're going into a Saturn return, when you got Saturn in good dignity, it doesn't necessarily make it all flowers and cherries and whatnot, but it does show that the person can make a lot of positive growth during that time. It's a period of really growing up. So I think that this person's asking this question at a wonderful time when they're getting ready to start to do the work based on what that Saturn's going to do here in January. So that's a good point. Thank you, Channing.
Yeah.
Okay. Well, let's go ahead and look at her work. So her question about work was, which career should I pursue and have the most success in? And which career should I pursue and have the most success in? And again, when we look at this chart, why is there this confusion? Well, when you look at it, there are 3 planets in the 10th house. There are 4 planets in the 7th house. We have K2 on the ascendant. We have the 10th Lord debilitate in the 7th. So that in and of itself just immediately tells us this person is going to have a really difficult time sorting out, which their question indicates. So our role as an astrologer is to, number one, acknowledge that, because it's not that there's something wrong with this person. It makes perfect sense based on their chart. But our role as an astrologer is to try our best to pick through all of these different agendas and how they're all competing and figure out which is the strongest or which is the path that's going to lift them up the most. And the good news is that we do have the 10th house aspected by Jupiter, aspected by Mercury, to manifesting planets. And all these planets in the angles, Rashi aspect, and that's the key here, Rashi aspect in the 10th shows us that there is a lot of attention towards career in this lifetime. And honestly, I think that this chart might be more of a career-centered chart. And if she gets that figured out, the relationship will take care of itself. But it's more of a career-centered chart because of that, self-development through career and so on.
Yeah, I see.
Yeah, so Channing, we'll again let you go ahead and kick this off. When you're looking at this chart, what are the ideas that come to your mind, realizing there's a lot of potential, a lot of possibilities, but what are the things that we could probably focus on that might be a little more easier for this person to palate in regards to a career choice?
Well, you can see the Atmakaraka there is the moon, which comes into the 10th house. So that moon right there is a high indicator for the potential for education, just because the moon itself is highly connected. And it's Rashi aspected by almost every single planet in her chart. So all of, most of the houses get included, most of the areas of life, but you do have some indications of some career. We've got the 3rd cusp, we've got the 9th cusp. Both of those are indicated for the potential for education. there's also a mutual exchange that we see between that Mercury and that Jupiter. So that becomes the 7th and the 10th. So that can connect this person to the 7th house, other people, engaged with other people, somehow working in some sort of connection or business with other people. But there is still that that Rahu in the 7th house, so they're going to want to make sure that they're working on all types of relationships, not just romantic relationships, but all sorts of relationships, because they may engage with other people in what they're doing.
Right.
Yeah.
Right. And so Jupiter is important, Mercury is important. Moon and Jupiter together can also give an emphasis on giving counsel and guidance to others, which speaks to the educational aspect of things. But also if we look at, so the moon's the Atmakaraka, it is Rashi aspected by Venus, a very strong Venus, exalted Venus, in the 7th in the birth chart. But in the Navamsha, we have moon and Jupiter coming together as well through Rashi aspects, which again can speak to things like education, because Jupiter and Venus are, they are related to preceptors. And moon and Venus together can also speak to work in something like body work or massage therapy. And so we can't ever forget the emphasis of Venus there, pulling in this energy of feminine issues. So it could be working with women. It could be working in industries that deal with helping women grow beyond their difficulties. Anytime I see a lot of difficulty in the 7th house, especially with Venus involved, while it can show a person going through difficulty in relationships, it can also show a person learning to grow through those difficulties to help teach others as well. So I do think that with that Venus moon, the educational aspect, the counseling aspect, the guidance aspect, as well as working with others, communicating with others, helping others to also grow through their difficulties. And I think there might be a strong emphasis towards women in that regard. Mm-hmm. And that Jupiter, Mars, and Moon, that's a wonderful combination to have in the 10th house to help support activity and effectiveness. So, you mentioned Saturn going through tropical Sagittarius, which it's been doing for about 2.5, almost 3 years now. Well, that was also aspecting that 10th house. So it was going to put the brakes on, in a sense, moving forward with career, understanding how to move forward. But it's also been Rashi aspecting the 1st house and planetarily aspecting, since it's Saturn, which can make a person feel delays and debts. But remember, it wasn't until earlier this summer when Rahu and Ketu were also on her 1st and 7th house, giving more confusion to her sense of self and what she should be doing. So transit-wise, it seems like Saturn moving out of that position, going into a good situation, Rahu and Ketu, as they've moved away from the 1st cusp and the 7th cusp and the Rashi aspect of the 10th, but I think that's going to be a wonderful time for her to start to figure this out for herself. But anyway, you were going to say something, Channing, before I went off on that diatribe.
Oh gosh, no, it's interesting. Well, you also see the moon involved with Mercury too, Mercury being the ascendant and the 10th house lord. So that can indicate some type of profession in the healing industry too, which
right.
You mentioned, counseling and helping other people, especially possibly women with that exalted Venus, overcoming things. But I do see the connections for some sort of healing in the Mercury moon and the Virgo ascendant connection too. So
right. Good. And dasha wise, she's going to be going into a Jupiter moon dasha around in 2018. And so that's going to activate this 10th house fairly strongly. Mm-hmm. And it's going to activate the 7th house, and that moon being the 11th lord can start to give better gains and breakthroughs in regards to her direction in life. So I think that, once she gets into 2018, into the Jupiter moon cycle, and then after that into the Jupiter Mars cycle, Jupiter Mars moon, with that Saturn moving into tropical Capricorn, I think that some of this confusion might actually start to lift for her in regards to the direction she needs to go in.
Yeah, and you're also going to see Jupiter move into tropical Sagittarius around 2018, later in 2018. So I think that that's going to have a really nice impact on all of these as well, because Jupiter is going to be really strong in the sign of Sagittarius.
Right.
Yeah, be able to bring some opportunities and also some emotional fulfillment.
Mm-hmm.
The fourth house there. So
yeah, so this is one of those charts that I think when you first look at it and you see this ashamed Avashta in the 7th and all these planets in the 10th, that, I mean, and K2 in the first, sometimes that makes me pause and go, oh my goodness, what are we going to say about this individual? But to see, how the transits are working, how things work out in the Navamsha and the Dashas and so on, I really think a lot of the difficulty was probably due to those transits of Rahu and K2 and Saturn. So do you have any other thoughts about the career aspect for this person? I've got one more, but that's sort of a left fielder. So I just want to see any other thoughts you might have.
Well, I think we've covered a lot of it. Education, possibly healing, possibly counseling, those things, and possibly working with other people with the 7th and 10th mutual exchange. I think those are some pretty prominent possibilities. And it kind of seems like all of those things could be blending into one.
Exactly. Yeah. I think that's an important point to remember, not just for this chart, but for astrology in general, that when we ask a question about what should I be doing for my career, that if you are lucky enough to have an astrologer say, oh, look, your sun is in this house, therefore you will be a government official, and they don't look at anything else, that's great. But for the rest of us, what usually happens is we have all these influences, and we have to figure out, well, how could it work out that education, that healing, that working with women, what kind of career could that look like for an individual? We have to think that through. For example, being an astrologer, for Channing and I, we have to be able to communicate. We have to be able to use technology. We have to be able to do counseling. We have to be able to do research. So all those things play into that particular career of being an astrologer. So when you're thinking about these kinds of things, when an astrologer gives you possibilities, what you need to do is not just necessarily pick one of those things and drive it into the ground, but ask yourself, how can all of those strengths tie together to give me a particular kind of career-related experience? Now, the last thing I would say that comes to mind with that exalted Venus, Mahapurusha, right, Channing?
Yeah.
Deals with all the things that we've discussed, but when we have a benefic moon such as this on an angle from Venus, this can give skills with the senses, such as design or working with form and beautiful things. So maybe this person has a hobby of, floral arrangement or interior design or whatever it might be. But that is also something that could be possible for this individual. But just like music is a hobby of mine, it was never anything I explored as a career. It was just something fun to do. That is shown in the chart as well. So that might be something that this person also works out anyway. All right. So before we conclude today on this chart, any final thoughts or questions, Channing? Or not questions, any final thoughts or comments?
Well, I just really like how you pointed out what's going on with her dashas and how you can see these difficult things in the chart. And you can also see that because of the karma of where the dashas are, that this person's entering into a much more supported time in their lives, that Jupiter being supported. The second half of Jupiter dasha tends to get better because it has the support from Mars and Moon and Sun. And then Saturn dasha looks like it'd probably be strong as well, with Saturn in the 5th house on a trine and in its own sign, that there's some potential for Saturn to be a positive dasha as well. So that's going to take up a good chunk of the next few years of this person's life, and having some nice planets well supported really mediates a lot of some of the underlying difficulties that you see right off the bat.
Right. And the main thing we need to focus on for her is definitely working on that Mercury, because it will help not only the career, but also relationships too. So rewind the video, replay that, and start applying those things. Okay. Well, thank you very much for being here with me today, Channing. I look forward to our next chart, which we will be exploring, again, foreign travel, as well as whether someone should be a pilot. It's another career-related chart.
That's fine. Thanks.
Okay.